Welcome back, focused learners. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today for a brand new explainer. We are going to be breaking down an intense, highly calculated, and honestly, mind-blowing fantasy sparring session today. We're stepping straight into a highly specialized training ground known as the Crucible of Water to analyze a clash between two fascinating combatants, Mitsuki and Tempest Roma. Now, what makes this source material so compelling, and frankly, why I literally couldn't wait to share it with you, is how perfectly it blends raw, grounded kinetic physics with incredibly complex philosophical magic systems. It is so rare to see a combat system where you have to worry about bodily aerodynamics and thermodynamics just as much as you do about mystical energies. Throughout this analysis, we're going to dissect the physical forces at play, the extrasensory perceptions used to process those forces, and the ultimate combat philosophies that dictate exactly who walks away from this spar in one piece. We'll be looking really closely at the physiological stakes, right? Like how shifting heart rates and sudden changes in bone density literally make or break a fight. So get ready to focus in because we are unpacking the mechanics of magical combat layer by intriguing layer.
Okay, let's dive into this. How do you defeat an opponent when your own strength becomes your worst enemy? It's a crazy question, right? But think about it like this. Imagine swinging a baseball bat as hard as humanly possible. If you hit a standard brick wall, the wall might chip, the bat might splinter, and your hands will definitely sting from the impact. But what if you swing that exact same bat into an incredibly dense, magically reinforced wall of solid rubber? Every single ounce of power, aggression, and kinetic momentum you throw into that swing doesn't just stop. It gets mathematically and physically reflected right back into your arms, likely shattering them. And this is the terrifying reality Mitsuki faces in the text we're exploring today. It's a high-stakes scenario that forces us to completely rethink how a confrontation is actually won. It isn't about hitting harder or generating more force. Actually, scratch that. It's about fundamentally understanding the physics of your own actions and realizing that in certain situations, generating more power simply means digging your own grave that much faster.
Act 1. The Crucible of Water. Let's set the stage.
To truly grasp the stakes here, we first have to understand the environment itself. The Crucible of Water isn't just a basic arena. It has a very specific physiological goal. Mitsuki and Tempest Roma are there to acclimatize to the element of water. But they aren't swimming in a pool, right? They are hosting the element within the human body, specifically driving it through the heart and the circulatory system. So their internal biology is already operating under immense magical stress before the fight even begins. With that intense internal pressure established, the spar kicks off. Mitsuki immediately calls upon a technique named Tempest Roma Mode Turtle Warship, initiating this massive, high-momentum forward thrust. But Tempest Roma's reaction is an absolute masterclass in kinetic redirection. She uses a flash step to close the distance, leaps into the air, and deflects Mitsuki's downward fist with a drop kick. Then she seamlessly harnesses the very force of Mitsuki's own thrust to launch herself further into the air, somersaulting to land gracefully behind her opponent. Mitsuki, meanwhile, is sent hurtling toward the unyielding ground by her own redirected momentum. To survive, Mitsuki used the potential energy of her fall to somersault, kind of nullifying that initial crash, but she's still flying backward toward the heavy walls. She lands feet first, crouching to manage the impact. But here is where the physics get wild. To keep her legs from completely shattering, she massively raises the density of her own bones. The sheer kinetic pressure transferred into her body actually cracks the walls of the crucible behind her. And to prevent all that built-up thermal and kinetic energy from just rupturing her internal organs, Mitsuki is forced to simultaneously dispel the dangerous, excess force right out through her hair. It's just an incredible display of raw physics, bodily control, and kinetic dispersion.
Act 2. The Mind's Eye. Let's look at the internal software of this fight.
What we just witnessed in that explosive opening wasn't just a matter of fast reflexes. Tempest Roma's counter-offensive style is an elaborate, highly calculated puzzle. To understand how she redirected that massive force so effortlessly without being crushed, we need to pull back the curtain on the internal software running her combat system. She employs 3 distinct types of perception that work in perfect synergy. The first layer of this internal software is magnetic perception. This is the extrasensory ability to reveal and project the precise trajectory of an opponent's next movement. Tempest Roma isn't merely reacting to what Mitsuki is doing in the moment. She is actively seeing the projected path of the physical attack before the strike even fully materializes. Think about the absolute psychological terror of facing an opponent who possesses this. You throw a punch, and before your arm is even fully extended, your opponent already knows the exact coordinates in three-dimensional space where your fist will end up. She knows exactly where the momentum is heading, which basically makes unpredictability completely impossible.
And this brilliantly illustrates the necessary second layer, zone perception. While magnetic perception reveals the trajectory, zone perception accurately maps out the exact combat range. Tempest Roma can physically sense and visualize the precise boundary of the space Mitsuki can reach. In real-world martial arts, high-level boxers do something kinda similar through years of instinct. Slipping a devastating knockout punch by mere millimeters simply because they instinctively know exactly how long their opponent's arms are. Well, zone perception takes that instinct and makes it absolute, infallible data. By knowing the absolute limits of our opponent's striking distance and combining it with the trajectory data we just talked about, Tempest Roma can position herself in the optimal spot, just a fraction of an inch out of danger, but perfectly placed to intercept the incoming force.
The final and arguably most intricate layer is depth perception. The source text describes this distinct wave of cool energy washing over Tempest Roma as this specific ability activates. Depth perception actively calculates the actual physical forces acting upon a body. Tempest Roma is literally observing the mechanical stress and kinetic energy building up within Mitsuki's muscles and bones. She can see how much force is behind the thrust, not just where it's going. It is this interlocking web of perceptions that makes her defense practically impenetrable. Magnetic perception tells her where the attack is going. Zone perception tells her exactly where it stops, and depth perception tells her exactly how much force she needs to manage. By fusing these three together seamlessly, Tempest Roma executes a flawless defense. She sidesteps exactly as Mitsuki thrusts, knowing precisely how to catch her hand without bearing the brunt of the kinetic load.
Because of Tempest Roma's flawless counter, Mitsuki is flung violently into the air, once again on a fatal crash course for the unarmored walls of the Crucible. But Mitsuki is an exceptionally adaptive tactician, and her mid-air recovery here is a breathtaking application of aerodynamics. While hurtling through the air, she immediately dispels the incredibly heavy Turtle Warship mode. In a split second, she shifts tactics, activating Dragon mode, and the text vividly notes golden scales materializing across her body. Instantly, she manifests wings and stretches them out wide to intentionally catch the air, utilizing wind resistance to deliberately generate drag and slow her dangerous momentum. As she falls, she activates her own zone and depth perceptions, but she uses them not to strike, but to sense the intricate flow of the wind currents around her. She moves her body in total synchronization with the air resistance, carefully bleeding off those crashing kinetic forces. Once the internal physical pressures have dramatically decreased to a survivable level, she forcefully flaps those wings to catch a passing updraft, utilizing the thermal energy to thrust upwards and totally regain her balance. She turns a chaotic, potentially fatal fall into a breathtakingly calculated aerodynamic maneuver.
Act 3. The power of reflection. Let's look at how strength is turned inward.
It is right here, hovering in the air after surviving that throw, that Mitsuki realizes a terrifying truth. Tempest Roma almost caused her to self-destruct simply by redirecting her own thrusting force. This realization brings us to the profound philosophical mechanics behind Tempest Roma's technique known as Mode Pax. Listen closely to how Tempest Roma describes this philosophy in the text. She says, "The true virtue of the moon is in the power of reflection, or simply put, depth. In combat, this is supposed to manifest as a counteroffensive style of combat that turns the adversary's momentum against them. The virtue of a counteroffensive style of combat lies in the fact that one must never be the first to strike, and must never damage an opponent with one's own power, but rather with the adversary's own power, turning the adversary's strength into his own worst enemy." Guys, it is absolutely chilling combat logic. The fundamental rule is to never initiate aggression and to never expend your own energy to cause harm. Why is this considered a virtue? Because it requires total, absolute control and a supreme lack of ego. You aren't imposing your will on the attacker, you are stepping aside and allowing the attacker's own violent intentions to defeat them.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is we are looking at a masterclass in contrasting philosophies. We have the aggressive, high-momentum strategy of Mitsuki pitted against the absorbing, nullifying, and redirecting strategy of Tempest Roma. It's the classic visual and physical metaphor of a raging fire attempting to burn an ocean. Mitsuki relies on generating massive kinetic force, trying to overwhelm and break through defenses through sheer output. But Mode Pax is the most devastating possible counterpart to an aggressive fighter. Because Tempest Roma's strategy is entirely built on fluidity and redirection, the harder Mitsuki attacks, the more danger she inadvertently puts herself in. Every single ounce of aggression supplied by the attacker merely arms the defender. If we examine their physiological states during the combat exchange we analyzed earlier, the contrast becomes staggering. Let's break down the mechanics here. Tempest Roma consciously slows her heart rate and blood flow, remaining completely calm despite the intense environment of the crucible. Simultaneously, she makes her bones highly dense but crucially without tensing her muscles. This combination of heavy internal density and relaxed musculature firmly anchors her to the ground, giving her an immovable center of gravity. This intense grounding is exactly what allows her to execute a perfect 180-degree sidestep while managing an immense kinetic load, dragging Mitsuki through the air in a massive arc. Mitsuki, conversely, is operating with a highly accelerated heart rate in a state of maximum force and acceleration. Her posture is entirely committed to forward motion, which Tempest Roma easily manipulates to send her totally out of control. It's a profound demonstration of grounded, calm stability, easily overcoming frantic, out-of-control momentum.
Act 4. Synthesis. Adapting to survive.
Realizing that continuing to strike physically is basically just signing her own death warrant via her own kinetic energy, Mitsuki drastically shifts tactics. She deduces that a counteroffensive style deals damage proportionally to the physical damage inflicted by the adversary. So, to adapt, she creates distance, drawing ambient energy from a nearby pool of fire to unleash a massive, ranged, fiery bombardment instead. But this tactical shift only serves to reveal the true, absolute danger of mode packs. It doesn't just work on physical punches or kinetic force. As Mitsuki fires the roaring flames, Tempest Roma calls upon Mode Pack's version Turtle Dragon Warship, and her very body takes on the properties of fire. She breathes in deeply. The text describes this moment with such vivid sensory detail. The massive fiery bombardment literally fuses with her breath, swirling and flowing completely into her body without burning her. She totally nullifies the elemental attack, taking all that destructive heat and safely absorbing it. Mode Packs renders all incoming aggression ineffective, regardless of whether it is physical or elemental. And then the trap springs. Tempest Roma opens her eyes, lets out a deafening roar, and releases that exact same fiery bombardment right back at Mitsuki, only this time it's amplified with extra force.
So the crucial point is how Mitsuki synthesizes everything she's learned about Mode Packs to actually survive this overwhelming blast. Facing a literal wall of amplified fire, she doesn't panic. She doesn't put up a physical shield. She doesn't even attempt to dodge. Instead, she slows her own breathing, mirroring her opponent, and activates her own depth perception. She analyzes the incoming fire mathematically to derive the exact wavelength of Tempest Roma's attack. This is where the physics get truly fascinating. Think of it like acoustic resonance or destructive interference in sound waves. If you take two identical sound waves and play them completely out of phase with one another, they cancel each other out, right? The result is total silence. Mitsuki applies this exact principle to thermodynamics and magic. She adjusts the internal frequencies of her own body to perfectly match the precise wavelength of the incoming fire. Because she matches the frequency, there is no friction, there is zero impact. She simply inhales deeply, and the roaring, deadly flames turn into a gentle, harmless breath. The fire fuses with her, enters her body, and she safely channels it right back out into the surrounding elemental pools, leaving her heart beating completely calmly. By adopting the very principles of Mode Packs, absorbing, nullifying, and redirecting without resistance, she successfully defends herself.
Tempest Roma smiles warmly and immediately ends the spar, acknowledging that Mitsuki has truly, deeply grasped the profound significance of Mode Packs. It is a stunning lesson in martial arts, physics, and thermodynamics, proving that sometimes the ultimate defense is simply refusing to supply the friction your opponent desperately needs to hurt you. And that brings us to the end of today's explainer, but I want to leave you with a final thought to carry with you. How would you apply the power of reflection to redirect the conflicts and aggression you face in your own life? Think about a heated argument you've had recently at work or at home. If someone comes at you with intense verbal aggression, our instinct is to push back with equal force, creating a massive collision. But what happens if you stop pushing back? What if, like Mitsuki facing that wall of fire, you simply refuse to provide the friction? By remaining calm, analyzing their wavelength, and redirecting their energy instead of absorbing it as an attack, you might just neutralize the conflict entirely. Thank you so much for focusing in with me today. Keep learning, keep analyzing the mechanics of the world around you, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.